In today's episode, my wife Téa joins me as we discuss an exercise that we feel is incredibly important for everyone at this point in time. There are so many situations in the world right now stirring up a myriad of emotions for people, including fear, worry, frustration, overwhelm, and so many more. Join us as Téa and I share with you a key question to ponder, followed by an enlightening process to use the next time you come across something that scares you. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. And thank you for joining us again on the Inspire Health podcast. I am Dr. Jason Loken. And being both a naturopathic doctor and an osteopathic manual practitioner and working in the industry of healthcare for over 20 years, you start to learn a few different things and you see trends in the way people get ill and how people recover. And one of the things that I've noticed over the past couple of decades is that as much as it's important to focus on physical health, and we'll look at all that stuff. I've written books on looking at lab testing and how to the difference between normal versus optimal ranges for people and why it's so important to get certain biochemistry checked. And that's a really important piece of it. But what you'll notice if you've been watching a lot of the podcasts over the last while is that we've really taken more of a deeper dive into looking at things like how the mental and the emotional and the spiritual well-being of somebody affects their physical health. And that's been a personal interest for me over the past probably decade. And so I find that that is such an important piece to look at. And so why I'm mentioning that right now is because today's episode, I invite my wife, Téa. She joins me, and because often we'll have these conversations throughout the day, or as we're watching something or we're learning about something, we'll always have these conversations at some point throughout the day. And then sometimes we're like, oh, well, we'll share that with our Patreon community, which you can check out at Adventures in Joy on Patreon. But we'll also sometimes take them. I think that's a really good topic to build a podcast episode around. So the other day, Tay and I were listening to a YouTube episode around something, and we talk about a little bit more in the actual episode here. And we just thought that was really quite profound. And so we had a big conversation about it, and we thought we should share our conversation with everyone and sort of build it out a little bit more so that it actually can be turned into a bit of a process for people. And so with today, at this point in time in the world, there are so many different things going on. And I don't care what your beliefs are on anything specific, it doesn't really matter at this point. There's a number of different things that are happening and taking place in the world that are causing a lot of unease, that are making people feel unsettled, that are creating a ton of worry for people. I mean, there's mandates going on that where people could be losing their jobs. There's all sorts of stuff that is going on right at the moment that's creating a lot of scare in the world. And for very real reasons. And so when we came across this specific question that was posed, and then we had to reflect on that, and just listening to that question and sitting and reflecting on it that we're going to talk about in this episode, it really helped us start to look at how do we ultimately get to the roots of healing what's actually going on. And so this particular question is going to be around what to do the next time you see something that scares you. And we explain this in a little bit more detail as you go along here. So tune into this episode, learn what the question is, and learn the process that can be worked around it. And if you follow through the process, if we have the ability and the willingness to actually look at it as honestly as we can, I think that you can actually create a frequency that will not only help to heal you, but it will also be able to put that out to help to heal others. And if collectively, if we can do that, I just think that the sky's the limit. I think that the possibilities for what type of situations we can literally heal and expand from is almost limitless. So check out the exercise, go through it. I encourage everyone to practice these types of things on a regular basis. We've got so many opportunities to feel overwhelmed or worried or frustrated at this point in time. So take those and use them as a reflection to look back and follow through with this exercise. Let me know how this goes for you, and let me know if you got any insights after doing it. Now, I'd also like to thank our sponsor, C60. And I've had a couple of questions come up around C60. People have been asking, how much should I take? So if you're not familiar with C60 at the moment, check the link below or go to the Inspire Health podcast and click the link on the top right corner, and you can get 15% off your order. Just use the promo code DRLOKEN, all in capitals. That's Dr. Loken in capitals, and you'll get 15% off your order. So C60, or carbon 60, also known as fullerenes, is literally the most potent, powerful antioxidant discovered. And so if you can incorporate that into your daily life, there's a myriad of different health benefits that can arise from it. So it can be looked at optimizing cellular energy production. You can fortify your immune system. You can promote healthy inflammatory response. You can even slow the effects of aging. So many things that are beneficial. Now, people wondering, how much do you actually take? So this again is individual, but I would say a good starting place for most people is 1 teaspoon a day. I take about 1 teaspoon a day and have been for the last 6 months, and it's absolutely a part of my routine now. Sometimes people that have a lot of chronic illness, they can move up. I've got some patients that even take 2, even up to 3 teaspoons a day. And I have some that are very sensitive. And if you're very sensitive, you're better off to start a little bit lower. Maybe start with like 1/4 of a teaspoon, move up to a 1/2 teaspoon, and go from there. Now, for the most part, I've never seen anybody other than one person really have a reaction because they took too much, where they needed to go a little bit slower because they were quite sensitive. But most people, usually at 1 teaspoon, is quite effective. And usually about 30 days, you start to notice some of the differences. I'd say a lot of times that starts with an increase in energy, an increase in focus, some of those things that come in handy a lot throughout our day. All right, everybody, check out the episode. Let me know how that is. Leave me a comment if you'd like. Share it with others. That's the best way to help get this information out. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And thanks so much for joining us again. If you followed us in this last series, we just finished up the series on trauma recovery. And what a fascinating series. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, go look at it. I think we had like 15 guests for that series. So incredible series. I think such a timely one that people can learn so much information from, and we rounded that topic out really well. I think we talked to lots of different perspectives and got lots of different information.
Thanks to all the guests who participated, and also all the viewers and audience who not only watched it, liked it, and also shared it. It helped us tremendously in getting the series out to many, many more people.
It definitely does, particularly now. Liking, sharing, and having you guys actually share the episodes and send them around, that is by far the best way to get the information out. Even now, I think the algorithms that are used to get the message out through YouTube and whatnot, I think it is definitely censoring certain materials. So it helps so much when you guys are able to share it. So thank you so much to everybody that shared.
Thanks for the support.
Yeah, it's very much appreciated. And so what we usually do is then we have a few episodes that we'll do in between, and then we are already on the process of setting up the next series. And this next series, Téa and I are super excited about. So this is one that we've been talking about for a while. And you'd even notice in a lot of the different episodes, we've talked about these concepts a fair bit. So the new series that's coming up is going to be called Energy, Frequency, Vibration, and Magnetics, the Next Era of Healthcare. And we are already putting together a pretty stellar cast. So we've got people lined up that Téa's just been getting confirmation from. So we've got Donna Eden, we've got doctors JJ Hurtak and Desiree Hurtak. So they're phenomenal speakers. Dr. JJ Hurtak did the book called Keys of Enoch. We've got Jonathan Goldman lined up. He's an award-winning composer and master sound healer. We've got
our friends, who have become our dear friends. Dr. Todd Ovakadis will be returning, as well as Lee and Monica. Lee is the voice of Cryon, will also be featured in the upcoming series.
We love it when those guys join in. There's so much wealth of information that those guys share. And so we feel like every time we have a series, we could definitely tap their brains to get a little bit more information from them. And we've got some other people too, like I think Lion Goodman's going to be on the roster. He's an expert in looking at beliefs, but we're going to really break this concept and this topic down around energy, frequency, vibration, magnetics. What does that mean? What does energy medicine mean? How do we measure it? How does it affect us, good and bad, all of these different things? And I just want to dive deep on this. We're going to get into aspects of DNA activation and how that really works and what that means. And I think it's going to be absolutely phenomenal, because I really do think that this is absolutely where we are moving. And that's what Tesla said. You know, as soon as you start to think of the world in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, that's what we need to do. So I think this is what's happening with medicine and healthcare, and we're going to take a real deep dive into that. Now, for today's episode, I wanted Téa to join me, and we just wanted to have a conversation with everybody. So this is often what we do with our Patreon community too, is when we come across things that we think are really important, or that kind of make us stop and go, "Ooh, that's a really important concept." Then we want to bring it to light to other people and see if we can figure out a way to turn into a bit of a awareness process,
Discussion.
just something that shines some more light on a topic so that we can all learn from it and ultimately all keep evolving and growing as human beings. And so what was really interesting is, before I get into this specific topic, Téa just opened up Pineal Tones, which is Dr. Todd Ovokadis' site. And she read a quote to me.
Yeah, so Pineal Tones, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
That's pretty profound, because let's hear that one more time. So from Pineal Tones, he said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So essentially what we're getting at there is how much our unconscious is dictating what is going on in our life, and not only dictating what is going on, that we just chalk it up to being fate or don't question it. So much of what we need to be able to do in order to keep growing and evolving and expanding ultimately is to become more aware. So anytime something comes up where we think it's a really good opportunity to draw more awareness and to look at ourselves more deeply, there's always some room for expansion. And the more that we can expand, I think that's key for shifting in consciousness, for changing our beliefs, to ultimately looking and creating a life that is different from where we currently are. And a lot of times we're in a place where we're wanting to see something different in our world, or see something different in ourselves or in our lives, and we get stuck. And so through awareness is often the process where we actually are able to make these different changes eventually come true.
So essentially, considering the time that we're in, and so many have called this period the Great Awakening, it's essentially a period of time, or a period within humanity's history, where there's a lot of things that many of us included, haven't really been aware of to the same degree that we are right now, that we have the opportunity to actually look at. And it is this time where we are, as a collective, bringing that which has laid in the shadows or under our noses, but we haven't really paid much attention to it, into full view. And so this is also timely on a global scale, I think, this conversation, because what we're speaking of and what we'll be focusing on within this talk is looking at all the ways in which we have suppressed parts of ourselves, or our shadows, the idiosyncrasies that we haven't really wanted to acknowledge within ourselves, and shed some light on it, accept it, bring it up and make it a part of our conscious awareness, so that then from that place we can direct our actions with greater clarity, And so even as far as where we are right now on a global scale, we're doing that as well. There's systems as we speak, coming down, tumbling, crumbling. And through this chaos, we're actually looking at the rumbles, we're looking at the pieces, and recognizing some aspects of our society that have been really hard and perhaps even horrendous to look at. But then once we do acknowledge all those bits and pieces, we can kind of say, okay, so where are we at right now? What do I want to contribute to? What do I want to create from that place of greater knowing, greater awareness? And so this is what this conversation is going to be looking at and pointing to.
Mm-hmm. And I think another concept that's really important around this is that as much as we are individuals, we are also absolutely interconnected. And this has been talked about in the metaphysical world for eons and eons. And through the eyes of quantum physics and the unified field theory, it's pretty much been proven that we are very much all interconnected and that we affect each other. And this is a really important concept when we talk about what we're going to talk about today, because if we believe that to be true, that we are ultimately all interconnected, then the question that I'm going to ask you is a very important one, because this would imply that the macrocosm is also within the microcosm and vice versa. So what I see in the outward world is a reflection of what in some capacity may be in my internal world. And what I feel in my internal world is also what is creating the external world around me. And these two things are paired. And so the other day, Téa and I were listening to a video by Kelly Thibault. And in that, there was a specific message and a question that was asked that we thought was really important. And this is the question that was asked. The next time you see a scary thing happening, look at it and ask yourself, what belief bore that? And am I a participant in it? So the next time you see a scary thing happening, look at it and ask yourself, what belief bore that? And am I a participant in it? So think about that for a moment. When something is taking place in our world that we don't like, either it's upsetting or it freaks us out or it worries us, and I mean, take your pick, because right now there's dozens and dozens and dozens of them. Depending on whichever way you see the world at the moment, it doesn't really matter. There's going to be all sorts of different opportunities to see things that are coming at you that are upsetting or scary or frustrating or whichever. But what this question is asking is first, we have to ask ourselves what belief, so even in humanity, what belief would be there that would allow this situation to even take place? And then to take that even one step further is to ask ourselves, in any way do I participate with that belief? Now, this isn't to say that you directly played a role in the specific event that you witnessed that scared you, but it is allowing you an opportunity to reflect on your own life and see if any of these beliefs are playing out in their own way within your experiences. This is what we mean by the opportunity for awareness. So let's give an example. So say something happens, for example, like you were on vacation and your bag got stolen. Okay, this is a very personal experience. So we went away and my bag got stolen. Lost my wallet, lost money, lost credit cards, lost everything, big hassle. So at first, the feeling is like just upset, pissed off, scared, all sorts of different things that can come up. And this isn't to try to deny those things or pretend that those aren't there and try to just move away from it. You have to legitimately often experience what you're genuinely feeling in the moment and then give way. That eventually gives way then when that burns itself out to expand into something different. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment too.
Well, it's interesting because why don't you go down your list of things that came up for you? Because those point to underlying belief system of yours. And then I will speak of a few that came up for me. Mm-hmm. Because it's not the same for everyone, depending on your belief system. And our examples will perhaps help to illustrate that.
Yeah. So when that happened to me, the first feelings that came up for me were, now how are we going to get by? We're not going to have enough. There was a bit more of like a scarcity mentality that came around that. So that was the first feeling that came up for me, was that feeling that kind of reflected back on scarcity around stuff. And then so for that to even take place, right? For someone to even be in a situation where someone will steal your bag, that would likely be one of the belief systems that even that person would have had in order for that event to even take place. that we don't live in a fair world. The world is an unfair place, that the world is maybe even a scary place.
Did that come up for you?
For me, the main one was first with the scarcity, and then I absolutely felt a feeling of do I live in this unfair, or do I live in this scary place? I felt a lot of fear. Now that came up for me because I've also got two young girls that are 4 and 5. And so that started to extrapolate onto that for me, as far as sort of this fear, is the world a scary place? That absolutely started to sneak up on me. And so for me, those were the ones that came up, was the feeling of the scarcity and the feeling of the world being a scary place.
So for me, it's interesting because the scarcity didn't come up for me at all. What came up for me was, aside from the fact that this sucks, how are we going to pay for our food? But also, I keep getting taken advantage of. I keep getting intruded upon. So that was the initial sense, the feeling, reaction that came up, and so very different.
Yeah, and this is the thing; it's all going to be very individual.
And I also got tweaked with the kids as well, because that was the mama bears, the parental instincts that kick in. Yeah. And that's that one we shared.
And there's nothing wrong with any of these. These are just, again, these are awarenesses. The first part is to be able to first just look at it all with openness and with non-judgment. So it's just to sort of have an honest experience of what am I feeling, and then follow the feelings to see what beliefs they're attached to. And so those ones came up. So that was the first part, that those then were some of the beliefs that needed to be there for an event like that to even take place on some level. So now the second part of the question is to ask ourselves if we are participating in any of those beliefs. Now, this is a little bit harder to go to, because this doesn't mean that you created this situation or anything along those lines.
Although it might.
It's possible for sure. Yeah, it's not to say it's not, but it doesn't have to be directly related to that. And in some ways it may be more than we think it is. But the idea of this conversation is to use that as a reflection to look, is there any of those beliefs that are still potentially playing out in my world and in my life in any other way? Do I view the world as a scary place? Where do I start to feel like I get overcome by fears, for example? Do I feel that there's a lack? Do I feel like I'm constantly kind of in a bit of a worry around, is there going to be enough? Something along those lines. So I have to then look at that and say, does that play out in my life in any other capacity, in different dynamics, in different relationships? Is that belief system playing out in some capacity?
Or in my scenario, the questions that I would ask myself is, am I always walking around in this sort of protected mode where there's an armor on, and I'm just waiting to get to be taken advantage of or attacked? And we're amplifying this just so that to make it simple for the sake of understanding. But these are also practices and contemplative ways of understanding the world that we've individually as well as together have worked on for quite a long time. But again, we are amplifying it so that it can be understood and maybe applicable in your life.
So once you've had a chance to sit with those, though, and I would take this with whatever next experience shakes you up a little bit, scares you, frustrates you, whatever it might be, and then run through this to see, because this concept has been talked about so often. I mean, even we talk about, go back to what Gandhi said, be the change you wish to see in the world. So it's like, if we are able to actually try to take an experience and then look at how do we actually transform ourselves? How do we take an honest look at ourselves? Are we contributing to this energy? If we think of it all as sort of an energy or a frequency that is emitting off of ourselves, beliefs play a huge role in dictating what that frequency is going to be. So if we want to change that frequency, then we have to change something within inside ourselves. And think about this, if everybody in the world did an exercise like this and wholeheartedly was ready to do an exercise like this, and then actively looked at what beliefs then do they need to change? How do they need to change a belief? What a belief do they need to adopt that will short circuit what they're seeing in front of them that they don't like? And then we actually started to do that. Think of how quickly the world would change.
So let's play that out a little bit. Maybe we should give examples around that.
So after you come across the beliefs that possibly were there, and then figure out the ones that actually still sit for you, that you might be playing out in different aspects of your life, then the next question is, then what belief do I need to adopt that will short circuit what I see happening in front of me? So for example, if I had a feeling of scarcity, then the belief that I might want to adopt would be that nature will always provide whatever I need. Maybe that might sit with me. Now you have to kind of play with it to see which one actually resonates with you. And then we're going to go through some examples of how we actually try to integrate that a little bit, because it's not always so easy. Initially, we might have had these subconscious or conscious beliefs going on for decades. And it's not so easy as just going, oh, there it is. And this is the belief I want to adopt now. Sometimes people are ready and the belief just shifts. But a lot of times it then has to be practiced. We have to look for the opportunity to actually see it. So that might be if I genuinely want to start to believe that the universe provides everything that I need, or that nature will always provide what I need, then I need to start to look for the truth in that. So whenever it is, this is like the old thing when you would find like a penny on the ground or a dime or a nickel or a quarter or whatever it might be, and you pick it up. And I remember doing these courses back with T. Harv Eker for peak potentials. And it'd be like, you pick up the coin and it's like, thank you, thank you, thank you. I live in a world of abundance, right? Strong belief.
Or you walk by a tree, like a fruit tree, and there's plums growing and they're ready for picking. And you're thinking, the universe always provides for me.
Yeah.
Like we do this with our girls frequently. Or you get handed by the sales person at the ice cream store a small sample of ice cream.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, that's so awesome. We're always taken care of. And I would even add to that, that might be an approach. Another approach that might work for you is to actually follow the fear down the rabbit hole. Like worst case scenario, what can happen? So it helps that we kind of talk about these things even amongst ourselves, because if we're talking about scarcity, the other day, 2 nights ago, we were walking nearby, and there was, we walked by an area where there's a lot of homeless people just sleeping on the street. And I seriously considered that. I seriously considered, what if we have to go through a period, or what if it ended up being that, you know, all the downgrading we've done in this past little while have helped us to realize how little we actually need. But what if it comes to us losing everything, like everything? Like there's no money, there's no house, there's no vehicles, no cars, no nothing in the bank account, no money in our pockets. What if these lovely folks lying on the street enjoying the bag of cheesies that they were eating was all we had.
Still on their cell phone.
And still on their cell phone, incidentally. What if that's all we had? And I went there and I made peace with that. I'm like, well, it's actually, you know what? It's actually quite warm here. I think we'd be okay. Like we'd all just cuddle next to each other, us and the kids, and it would be a different perspective, different viewpoint that we would live out. And so sometimes worst case scenario, instead of fearing it, bringing it into your consciousness and going down the worst case scenario, and can you imagine yourself going there? And then you realize this monster that you had created previously in the figment of your imagination, when you make it conscious, when you bring it to light and you follow it logically, and you sit with it for a few moments, you realize, okay, if that's the worst of the worst that I'm fearful of, I could do that. That wouldn't be so bad.
Well, and you might even find in that process different options that you never even thought about. You might realize, oh, I actually have all of this other support network that I'd be able to actually gain assistance from or have support from, or all sorts of different things that you wouldn't even recognize. But that process that Téa is talking about, that was a process that Dr. David Hawkins would talk about often. He would talk about taking your fear to the end, take it all the way, burn it all the way out. And he would do that with anxiety. He would have chronic anxiety, and that was an exercise that really helped him a lot, was just see it right to the end and almost go to the worst case scenarios. And at some point, it's almost like you make peace with it, and then it doesn't hold such a grip over you anymore. It's like it's dissolved. And that's not to say that that's what you're wanting to create in your life or anything, but it's a way of just losing attachment to some of these things. And the more we don't have such strong attachments to them, then that stuff doesn't become so clingy.
Or it's almost like the shadow in the closet or the monster in the closet doesn't hold such a hard grip on you. Yeah. Again, you're bringing it into a level of conscious awareness that you recognize, okay, well, it's not so bad. I'd be able to make do.
Mm-hmm. And so like Dr. Todd said at the very beginning, we need to be able to bring the subconscious into the conscious. And if we're actually wanting to make certain changes in our life, then that's essential what we have to do. We have to bring the subconscious into the conscious. So that means any opportunity we have to bring awareness, we take that opportunity and see what we can find from it. Then once we work with a new belief, right, you might find that there's resistance that comes up with these new beliefs. And this is another way to think about beliefs. So this is the scale of consciousness. So if you haven't familiarized yourself with this, go check out the Map of Consciousness Explained episode that I did a little while back. That breaks down a lot of the work by Dr. David Hawkins.
And we're sharing the screen here. So in case you're listening to the audio version, know that if you switch over to YouTube, you're able to access the visual here as well.
And so what Dr. Hawkins basically said was that the level of consciousness that you are living at essentially is like the lens that you see the world through. So if I am sitting down somewhere at here a level 100 at around fear, then I'm seeing a fearful world. Everything that I see, doesn't matter what it is that comes, I'm going to find a way to be fearful around it. This is a prime example of when, say, something great happens, like you're going to go on vacation, but if someone's living at the level of fear, then rather than getting excited about the vacation, all the fun things they're going to get to do, they start to bring up all the fears of like, oh my gosh, what if this happens? Or what if that happens? Or what if I get sick? I got to do this and this. So it gets beyond sort of the due diligence that might be involved in prepping for a vacation, but you start to get overwhelmed by the worry and the fear around it. And as we shift in consciousness, you'll see, according to the diagram, it's like you go from contraction to more expansion. And so if we want to be able to start to change our beliefs, we have to have shifts in consciousness. We have to view the world different to legitimately make space to then have a different belief about the world.
We don't have to. We can choose to. Some people might like being contracted. Really, after a while, you recognize that it's a choice. It's always a choice.
Well, it all comes down to a choice, but I think what happens is that we've often got so stuck in certain levels of consciousness that then they just seem to run our life. And kind of like Dr. Todd said at the very beginning of that, if we recognize it, if we take opportunities like this to self-reflect and to draw awareness, then we've got the opportunities to constantly keep making shifts in this. So it's like we've talked about before, at the level of 200 is courage. And that literally is the courage to be honest with ourselves. And so if we're able to do that, then we can start to really move through these different levels and open up the door to have different experiences and have different beliefs.
Would you say that courage would also be a place where we rely more on activating our individual desires and wants? I was thinking of the recent episode with David Icke. He spoke about individuality and really investing in who we are, what we want to achieve in our world, speaking our truth, but it comes from a place of innate knowing, innate longing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think courage is probably where it all starts, because one of the things David Icke talked about was that it was so important to embrace and celebrate our uniqueness or our individuality. And a lot of times it's a scary thing sometimes to allow our own uniqueness because we're fearful of being judged or being shamed or being ridiculed or fitting outside of the box of what people have placed us in, whatever that might be, how we're going to be perceived. So I would definitely say that courage is an essential tool to be able to embrace your own uniqueness. So for sure. And then from there, I think it goes farther up the chain. When we start to connect to that inner knowing, I think we're actually getting into levels well above reason. Even Dr. Hawkins would talk about reason can be valuable. The 400s is a really valuable area, but when you move into things like love and into joy, it is no longer a linear process. It is a non-linear process. This is where we get into just knowings or deep intuition, insights, this type of stuff. It's a very different set of information that we are going to embody. So I think sometimes what we see is a conflict between those areas. I think a lot of times we can actually have very strong knowings at the heart of where we are, and we know what is right and what is wrong for us. But then we sometimes allow reason and logic to try to rationalize our way out of what we may innately know. And a lot of times the intuitions that we get may not make logical sense. They don't always make logical sense. And sometimes they actually don't make logical sense at all, but we just know we're supposed to do something or something feels right or wrong for us. So I think those things are very important to honor, but I think that we can't even begin to tap into that very well unless we have a certain level of courage to begin with. Because courage opens you up to truth. Now, one of the other things that we think is really important that's been really helpful for us when we are working with beliefs and working with trying to transition out of beliefs is the emotional scale. And
transitioning out of beliefs that don't serve us, that keep us contracted.
And this was stuff that we actually came across when we did some work with Abraham Hicks and all of the work that they do. And this was really, I think, a really helpful scale because it shows you the emotional scale from sort of lowest of the emotions up until highest of the emotions, and reminds me somewhat of Dr. Hawkins' scale of consciousness, but with a little bit of difference. And why I like this was because a lot of times when we start to change our beliefs, when we know that we have a belief that's no longer serving us, and we know that if we want to see something different in our lives, or we want to see something different in our world around us, that we need to work on that belief. So then we try to, quote unquote, like upgrade our belief into something that's more going to be of service or support for us as opposed to a detriment for us. Now, when we first do that, we often struggle with it because we don't totally believe it. And it might even trigger different emotions and different feelings that come up. And there's been such a big thing around, say, gratitude. You know, we want to adopt a mindset of gratitude. And gratitude is an incredibly powerful emotion to incorporate.
I think you wrote a book on it.
And I wrote a book on it because I really do think that it's incredibly powerful. But it's also often not quite attainable depending on where we are on the scale. I don't know if you've ever been in a place of complete powerlessness or gripping fear or grief or shame or something along those lines. It's hard to go from there way up the scale to something like appreciation and gratitude. And a lot of times I think we kind of fake it that we are to ourselves, but we're not really feeling like we are. And I think that's a big problem. I think when we are actually feeling something and then we're pretending to try and fool ourselves into being something else, we're actually creating a disconnect.
So that's called spiritual bypassing or escapism.
So the process that I thought was really helpful with this was really honoring where you are and then playing almost a bit of a game with it to see if you can gradually jump up the ladder. So for example, you see on here that if you are down in a place of fear, grief, despair, powerlessness, right? That maybe to go from there way up to the top, up around appreciation is way too big of a leap. It's just not doable. That maybe to go from fear to a place of, say, anger, right, may not be that big of a jump. That might be able to make that leap a little bit easier, you know, or from fear to a place of jealousy, for example.
So should we maybe use the examples that we were using initially just to illustrate how we would work with this?
So if we look at, say, the bag getting stolen, then maybe the first one is that feeling of powerlessness of like, oh my God, all my stuff is gone. I can't do anything. They're gone. They've disappeared.
I'll never get it back.
I'll never get it back.
We can't
Oh
pay
my
for
gosh,
this meal.
is this place an incredibly dangerous place? I need to hold on to my kids really tight. I need to guard everything, and a state of fear, right? Well, I could go from there, and then it's not too hard of a jump to go from that feeling, which would be the lowest end of the scale, to maybe like, fuck, that pisses me off. Like, holy shit, that I'm so ticked off right now that that even happened. And then as I'm allowing myself to feel that feeling, then I might jump up to blame, like, those guys, like, how could they possibly do that? I can't believe that they did that. Shame on me for even leaving my bag where I did for a moment without this. Like, that's the blame part, right?
Yeah, disappointment. We can't do anything. All these things that we were wanting to do in this next little while, or even having breakfast tomorrow, is going to be a stretch for us. This is so disappointing. So that's then starting to honor your feelings, and it's just working through the emotions that are organically coming up, but having this scale before you, even literally printing it out. And I think for a period, we even had it on our refrigerator.
Fridge, yeah.
Yeah, so that you can actually kind of see how you're progressing from the bottom, from the low, and elevating yourself. You're allowing yourself to step up higher on the scale using this literal scale that you're able to glance at. So yeah, that's so disappointing. We won't be able to have proper meals or go to any events. It'll be a shitstorm trying to call all the credit card companies, and that totally sucks. That's so disappointing. Oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed by all the credit card companies that we're going to be on hold for, and we are on hold for hours trying to get through. This is so much. How are we going to get by? This is so frustrating. This is so frustrating. I'm so irritated right now.
Yeah, impatience. I just want the credit cards to get here now so that I can move on. And then as we're going along, it's like, okay, well, we're all here. We're safe. The kids are happy. Weather's warm. Everything's pretty good. We're still okay. Nobody got hurt. Everything's being taken care of. We'll get the credit cards back. We've got some money enough that we're okay at the moment. So then you're kind of moving into contentment. And once you start to get up into there, it's not that far to start to move ahead, because you're letting go. You keep letting go. In one of Dr. Hawkins' books called Letting Go, he said that the key to it was letting go of the resistance to feeling what is naturally surfacing. And so if you just keep allowing yourself to feel what wants to come up without trying to make it anything different, it just starts to dissolve. And then you're not forcing yourself to try to make yourself feel something different. It just organically starts to feel different. You shed that feeling and it gradually moves into something different.
Well, you'll notice that even the feeling of contentment, like it feels like a sigh, like, okay, so we are where we are. The kids are able to swim for free. We're able to drink clean water. We have access to a bathroom. Here we are. And it's like, okay, we're okay.
And then you start to bring in some of the different things. You start to see things a little bit differently. Ultimately, I mean, we really do have a pretty profound belief that nothing really happens completely by chance. And there's always a bigger picture to things. So it was like, okay, everything was kind of taken care of. Maybe the people end up getting it that took the bag. Maybe they needed it, more than we did. Obviously they did. And not that we're wishing that upon ourselves, but that we can kind of let that go and almost say a prayer for the other people.
It almost became like an offering. It was an offering we made to somebody else. And then we hoped at that point that it would serve them in their life and their families in a beneficial way. If we could reach that point shortly after. I mean, the more you do this too, it becomes easier and easier, and it becomes organic. You don't have to look at any charts. I mean, this happened organically for me before I even came across some charts, but it took me well over a decade to figure it out on my own without any teachers necessarily pointing it out in this manner. But organically, it these tidbits were offered throughout our own personal journeys, and it's really helpful to have a scale like this to help you along with your journey as well.
And then once you start to move into like contentment and hopefulness, then you start to have a lot more momentum. You're moving into a much more expanded field. And so then from there, it was for us, it was like what always helps us is then, okay, let's start to get inspired about something. How do we actually change this energy and move it towards something that's going to be of service? So then it starts to get excited about what's the next series that we want to do. We start to reach out to different people. We're starting to think about the things that are going to get us excited. And it doesn't take too long for that to start to have a lot of momentum. And so then you start to move very quickly into positive expectation of what's going to be coming. We're getting really inspired. We're starting to get really eager for what we're putting together. Tons of passion starts to come out as we get excited for these different guests coming together and getting to interconnect and meet up in different ways. And then again, very quickly, you start to appreciate where you are and what your life is showing you. So,
and you also feel absolutely empowered because you're contributing actively toward that change or toward that shift or towards the future that you want to create for yourself and for everyone around you. So that's definitely a very large, empowering feeling.
So the idea of that is to sort of be aware of the idea of consciousness, be aware of the different scale of emotions so that when we get stuck, when we're working with changing some of these beliefs and upgrading them and we get stuck, don't get too frustrated with it. We've often had certain beliefs for a long time, but as we keep bringing them in, when we start to change our beliefs and we start to upgrade them, and then we have to practically keep looking for opportunities to see them playing out. We need to have that feedback, but we're so conditioned usually to looking for what we currently believe in that we miss so much of the other stuff that's always there. So if, for example, again, around the idea of scarcity, right? Or that the world's not a safe place, for example, start to look for every opportunity you can that you live in a world of abundance and that the world is actually not such a scary place, that maybe the world is actually a very benevolent place, and start to look for where you see that in the world all over the place. Look for it in nature, look for it in kids, look for it wherever you can, and remind yourself when you're seeing it. It's through that practice that will begin to eventually become your default.
And also become that which you desire and that which you long for. So if you're stuck on scarcity, can you find ways to be more generous with yourself, not only financially and giving things away, maybe that you might not need or that you might need and you give them away anyway, but can you be more generous with your time? Can you be more generous with kindness? And these are genuine feelings that you're choosing to become more generous with.
Mm-hmm. And remember that the outward showing of change is the inward transformation. I think that's really important to note, that when we see real change take place in the world, it's going to come from an inward transformation. And so if we're practicing these types of exercises, we're increasing the likelihood of continually creating that inward transformation so that we start to see a world that's different. And this is really at the foundation of the Adventures in Joy platform that we created, is that we really do believe that it all starts with the individual. And then from there, that literally ripples out to loved ones and to the community around us. And eventually that ripples out to the world. So if everybody took this type of a practice and just spent some time looking at what beliefs bore this incident into reality, and then am I participating in them in any way, I think it's just got so much potential for
growth.
Growth and expansion.
Mm-hmm. And not just, having your bag stolen or having a global pandemic or, it doesn't have to be so vast, so large, and so amplified. It can also be an interaction or a conversation you had with a family member, or an interaction that you had passing by a stranger on the street that triggered you or brought up feelings of discomfort within you. So these little tidbits can be really useful in starting to dive into this sort of practice, this sort of contemplative practice. And keep in mind, all of this is to really get to know thyself, and see how getting to know yourself more and more deeply and intimately allows you to really start to also see and observe and know the world around you on a different level as well.
Mm-hmm. So try it out. Give
Let
it a
us know how it
practice. I am
goes.
sure you will get an opportunity later today to probably experience that and try it out. Give us some feedback. Let us know how that goes. And all of this is just, these are, whenever we share these types of exercises, we're just sharing with you the same things that we try ourselves, that we experience ourselves, and that we often find have benefit for ourselves. So try it. If it doesn't work for you, try something different, right? We're not saying this is the way to do things, but we're sharing with you our experience. We figure if it's something that's been beneficial for us, it will be beneficial for somebody else out there.
These are just tools, another tool in your tool belt.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you have other tools, let us know your tools. All right, everybody, we love you lots, and we will talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.